sweltering hot day in June 1943, downtown Detroit residents flocked towards Belle Isle, the city's most popular beach and recreational area. The location was an ideal place to escape wartime anxieties. On Sunday, June 20th, an integrated crowd of an estimated 100,000 Detroit residents gathered to enjoy the island's beautiful beaches. But instead of a relaxing day, a racially tinged argument sparked a wave of violence that swept from the Belle Isle Park, pushed across the bridge, and blazed throughout the city. As the day progressed, rumors fanned the flames of what began as an isolated uprising. Eventually, blacks started breaking the windows of white-owned businesses, while white Detroiters retaliated and prepared themselves with weapons. The mayhem continued for a little over 2 days until federal troops were finally called to disperse the crowd. In the end, it was estimated that approximately 1,800 people were arrested, 34 killed, 760 injured, and a total of $2 million was amassed in property damage. Against the backdrop of World War II, the Detroit Race Riot of 1943 thwarted the effort to unify America's war workers and hindered progress towards racial equality. The riot that killed 34 garnered the attention of the local, national, and ethnic press, due mostly to the extremely divergent views between white and black leaders over what happened and what was to be done about the tense racial climate in Detroit. Michigan's Governor, Harry Kelly, issued a committee to compile a report of the events in hopes of resolving some of the public debate regarding the truth of what happened. However, the statement of findings in the governor's published account inaccurately represented the facts of the riot, refused to comment on the police's debatable conduct during the riot, resulting in a plethora of controversial media, and unlike reports from the 1919 and 1967 riots, offered no solution to the racial tensions in the city. Agitation in Detroit had been building dramatically between the white and black population in the years leading up to the riot. Between 1940 and 1943, an estimated 500,000 in-migrants flooded into the city of Detroit, an industrial center that drew black and white workers in search of wartime job opportunities. These rapid demographic shifts led many established Caucasian Detroiters to be defensive and preserve their jobs and housing separate from that of the new black migrants. There was a high consistency of prejudices and stereotypes that existed in the city. However, if white leaders were concerned and aware of this, the lack of preemptive measures on the part of the state is curious. These racial tensions were like kindling for the riot that sparked suddenly on that June day and swept through the city very quickly. There was a lot of alarm in the air regarding the riot. The leaders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, were aggrieved when they found out that out of the 25 African Americans killed, 18 were killed by the police force. Governor Kelly's committee aimed to counter the unease brewing over the current state of affairs. The primary purpose was to expose the most accurate account of the riot, as well as assure that the police controlled the violence to the best of their abilities. The report claimed that the event was not planned and police efficiently and justly managed the disturbances throughout the city. Moreover, it resolved that no particular party was to blame. The committee acknowledged the strained racial condition, but did not offer solutions to ease them. The report continues with accusations that the black press exaggerated incidents of racial discrimination. The committee accused the ethnic press and its leaders of indoctrinating black youth to use violence to obtain their equality. According to the report, the leaders that openly discussed racial discrimination provoked blacks and made them believe that racial equality would not be achieved without the use of some violence and violation of authority. Where have these young hoodlums been told they have a license to lawlessness in their struggle to secure racial inequality? Who has told them it is proper themselves to redress actual presumed grievances? Who has exhorted them violently to overthrow established social order to obtain racial equality? Such accusations are similar to those in the Detroit press that blame Negro hoodlums, which is terminology in the past for young black teenagers. These questions, aimed at black leaders, are the only hint of a suggestion to quell the city's unrest that is listed in the report. The working group for the report dedicated significant page space into explaining the initial disturbances at Belle Isle. The police proudly asserted their account of capturing the black youth that initiated the uprisings in the park. The majority of the African Americans' participation took place during these early hours of conflict. Their actions consisted mainly of looting, creating property damage, the bulk of which had ended by Monday morning. In the report, police are praised for their outstanding job of quelling the crowds on the first night. However, there is a gap between the police's victorious ending of looting the first day and the escalating number of deaths caused by policemen the following day. A closer look at the hourly details of all the specific incidents occurring before, during, and after the riot illuminate the police's involvement in the riot. The records confirm the widely published figures that 25 of the 34 people killed in the riot were black, and police officers killed 18 of that number. In addition, the statements of death from the committees indicate the lesser-known fact that many of the African Americans had wounds directly to the heart, chest, or head. These shots aimed at vital organs suggest police were not trying to stop African Americans from looting, but to kill them. Of the 9 whites killed in the riot, not one was shot by police authorities, and only 3 were shot at all. The rest were classified as accidental physical assaults. Although there were no specific protocol police had to follow regarding where shots were to be fired, it is safe to conclude that they were careless, for lack of a better term, with aim when shooting at black citizens, while not one shot was fired at the large white mobs. Such information suggests that some of the Detroit policemen might have acted on the prevailing racial lines, protecting anxious whites in violation of their oath to protect all citizens. The majority of the reports of deaths at the hand of the policemen indicate that the subjects were shot when they failed to obey orders to stop looting. This explanation does not hold up when read against the timeline when most of the shootings occurred. The hourly reports reveal that the most of the looting was over by Sunday night or early Monday morning at the latest. On Monday afternoon, there were only 8 fatal shootings of black looters recorded. Most of the remaining 18 deaths caused by policemen, however, occurred on Monday evening after the looting had ended. More evidence regarding specific times of all of the deaths and injuries show that the blacks were shot at more after the death and injuries of several policemen, which suggests that the inaction of the police was a form of retaliation against these few young African Americans who fired shots towards the police force. It is odd that such information was included in the research of the report, but went unmentioned in the publication for the country. The facts included in the report, but obscured in the press, confirm the inaccuracy of the media's portrayal of the event. The data regarding the truth behind the blacks shot by policemen, was not brought to light to the American citizen. Thus, the governor's fact-finding committee did not publicly make known the whole truth in respect to the riot. The NAACP files have their own reports contrary to the governor's fact-finding committee. Letters to and from the organization's leaders suggest the reason for the unreported events of whites abusing blacks was due to the distrust of police authority. Moreover, African Americans confided in black journalists their fear the truth of such conflicts would only get them a beating from the police. The NAACP then became the gathering place for information that undermined the central findings of the governor's fact-finding committee. The Crisis, official magazine for the NAACP in 1943, registered the organization's outrage at the claims that blacks were to blame for the violence perpetuated against them. Its writers countered that the Detroit Police Department's involvement, or lack thereof, escalated the violence that took place during the 2-day riot. In an article from the Crisis, the NAACP protested that Governor Kelly's report solves nothing, further embitters Negroes, and destroys any lingering vestige of confidence in the law enforcement authorities. The NAACP, more than anecdotes in a history of discrimination, to make its case for police misconduct in the riot. Photographs from the mainstream media clearly show whites harassing or threatening blacks while police respond weakly, if at all. Some pictures appear as if the police are even helping whites in their violent acts. The committee's conclusion can be baffling when presented with pictures like the figure here. There is a contradiction between the police files of the incident and the pictures taken during the riot. Figure 1 demonstrates this discord. The image comes from the Detroit News and depicts the police's conduct in a different light than of the governor's report. Here, the policemen exhibit racial preference. The policeman on the right is trying very hard to contain the anger of the black man, while the policeman on the left fails to prevent a white male from striking the man held in custody. Figure 2 from the July 1943 issue of Life magazine accompanied a short article chronicling key events in a series of pictures. There are multiple images of white mobs storming the streets of Detroit. African Americans were the unmistakable majority of the arrest, yet pictures such as this show an all-white mob attacking one or two blacks. The top of the image captures the mainly white gathering, probing questions as to why more Caucasians weren't detained. A large group of white protesters walk behind the one black man in custody. The caption claims that policemen are protecting the man from the white mob, while the man waits for a car to take him to the hospital. The details of the photograph illustrate how the police's actions were focused on seizing the few Negro hoodlums that initiated the trouble of Belle Isle, rather than quelling the angry mob of white Detroiters. The lower half of the print is a snapshot of officers escorting a black man away from the crowd. Still, they do little to protect the man from a bystander coming up and slapping the man in the face. 2 officers on the ground and 1 on a horse did nothing to stop the white man from coming in contact with the black man in their custody. There are clear expressions of indifference in their faces. They are not hastily trying to protect him or even to maintain the peace. Confronted with the information from the governor's report regarding command over the situation the first night, the police's weak efforts at controlling the white mobs over the blacks is clearly evident. So too is the possibility that federal troops might not have been necessary had the Detroit police defended the rights of all of its citizens and not just the racial lines drawn by anxious whites. The conflict gained national attention, bringing dissonance to the federal government's Americans all vision of wartime unity and shared struggle against the excesses of fascism. Opinions in the media regarding the riot were wide and varied. In an article from Harper's Magazine, November issue of 1943, the author, Earl Brown, blamed racial hatred in the city on the lack of the city's plan for accommodating the new black population of war workers. Brown also refers to the Detroit Police Department's preferential conduct during the riot, as well as the fact that racial tensions were present in the city and nothing was done about it. Brown's article stresses the fact that black hoodlums did not start the riot, as papers had reported, but the Great Migration and influx of African Americans in the Detroit community provided a basis for the strain and the racial issues that consequently fueled the riot. Moreover, Brown claimed police had little interest in protecting the civil liberties of black people before, during, and after the riot. The police were more concerned with maintaining racial lines rather than preserving the unity that was necessary assurance for an American victory overseas. Brown points out that the mayor was aware of these racial anxieties. He stressed, as Mayor Jeffries subsequently admitted, a riot was expected. The only question was when. It is a singular fact that in the face of this expectation, neither the city government nor Washington made any positive moves. It was as if the Detroit government had a prepared excuse for what was inevitably going to happen. Other newspapers, like the New York Times, also noted the controversy behind the investigation of the riot and the variety of responses. One such article cites a cable from the American service camp in London that was sent to the New York Times only a few days after the riot. The cable infers that an American serviceman did not understand why the Detroit riots were not covered in American papers, yet they were presented in London's papers. The cable reads, whether by accident or direction, the edition here of the Stars and Stripes American service paper has had no space for news of the race riots in Detroit. Its policy is to avoid controversial subjects. Curiosity for the controversial nature of the riot compelled the writer to send a comment on the issue. Troops expecting that they were fighting for a unified country were expecting that they were fighting for a unified country. However, that was not the case as exemplified in Detroit. Such controversial and racial issues were not printed overseas out of fear of disheartening the troops. The Detroit race riot centered along hardening racial lines that the government hoped would remain hidden from the men fighting for what they believed was a unified country. This is also where the fear of foreign agitators meddling in the United States civil affairs stems from. If papers reported on racial tensions crossed enemy lines, the enemy could infuse and support violence as an action to gain equality for blacks in America, consequently causing more turmoil in the homeland and hurting the war effort. However, in the end, both papers and Michigan's official commentary on the event concluded no foreign agents were involved. Despite all the articles questioning the governor's report, most articles continued placing the majority of responsibility on the new black members in the community. As Detroit police and government officials tried to blame blacks, promulgating more prejudice, other people started pointing the finger back at them, encouraging awareness. In a letter to the New York Times, written by Samson Horn, printed the same day as the cable, he avows that the Detroit race riot was not something solely started by blacks, but that white mobs were equally to blame. Horn also argues that the riot grew into hysteria because of a lack of police enforcement on the white mobs. He confirms that there was gross and obvious discrimination in the enforcement of the law. Thurgood Marshall, future Supreme Court Justice, wrote an article in the August 1943 issue of The Crisis, comparing the policemen in Detroit to the Nazi Gestapo. Marshall believed, much of the blood spilled in the Detroit riot is on the hands of the Detroit police. The article pinpoints several incidents in which the police failed to protect black citizens. Specific cases of the police's participation in acts of violence with the white mobs are cited, among other reports of discriminative behavior by the police. Marshall claimed that after jumping out of a SWAT car with their guns, the policemen would then tell the Negro bystanders to run and not look back. On several occasions, persons running were shot in the back. In other instances, bystanders were clubbed by police. Examples like these suggest that the Detroit Police Department engaged in more frequent and intense acts of violence than the Governor's Commission reports during the race riot. This survey of government and media responses to the riot demonstrate that the governor's report exasperated rather than quelled racial anxieties. This failure to address true underlying causes of the outbreak left the city ill-equipped to curb the conditions that led to the 1967 riot, which led to 467 Detroit citizens injured and 43 dead. Mayor Jeffries voiced his awareness of the possibility of such a riot and the need to prevent future outbreaks, but the lack of preventative assistance and inaction after the riot not only failed to resolve the problems of 1943, but set the conditions for the 1967 riot. The faulty work of the Governor's Committee and its silence on long-standing racial issues constitutes an inaccuracy in itself. Absent any real assessment of the Detroit's deeply embedded racial inequality, the report offered no practical solutions. It only implied that African Americans should remain passive and obey the police force they distrusted. In addition to assigning responsibility for the Detroit riot to the black community, the so-called findings of fact contributed to the conditions that sparked another wave of rioting a generation later. The government's attempt to paper over the realities of race in America did not contribute to wartime unity. In the long run, they widened the racial divide because individuals and media outlets continued to tell the story of the riots, keeping white police officers' involvement skewed in the eyes of readers in Detroit. The statement of findings, inaccurate representation of the facts of the riot, is illuminated in the hourly reports exposing the violent escalation of police arms and mismatched information regarding the timing of black deaths associated with looting. It is odd that the report refused to comment on the controversial behavior and actions of the Detroit police when there are other material insinuating that the force did not fairly disperse the mobs and violence. More disagreement in the media exceeds the likelihood that the governor's account was by any means the whole truth. The media's exposure and wide knowledge of the extreme racial issues in Detroit further exemplified the need for a solution, and yet nothing was offered. After further investigation of the riot, the media offers clear contradictory evidence against the governor's report, thus proving that the published findings did not depict the whole truth of the riot. Furthermore, because the report failed to address the racial animosity in the city as a precursor to the riot, the city of Detroit was left in an unstable state, just waiting for another racially infused outbreak.